What's going on? Thanks for watching the video. I really do appreciate you guys and your time watching these videos. I want to say a quick thank you to those of you who are supporting the channel with your subscription. It does mean a lot to me. For those of you who haven't, maybe consider hit that subscription button. Show your appreciation by doing so. I really do appreciate it. Let's get on to the topwater baits. When I think about topwater baits and throwing baits for bass, specifically on the top water column, I think about a couple of things. One is I think about an explosive strike that you're probably going to get from a big bass, and I love that. I love seeing that. That's probably one of my favorite ways of catching a bass. But the other thing that I think is overlooked is what happens when you throw a top water bait. I think the visual feedback that you get from those bass, whether they're actually biting it or not, tells you a lot about what's going on in the water and the behavior of that bass that day. So pay attention to when you're retrieving these baits and what the bass are doing, whether they're chasing for a couple of feet, whether they're schooling up behind it, whether there's juvenile bass or bait fish following your bait. It all tells you something about what's going on in that body of water on that day. And then you can adjust to maybe even a different bait, or maybe to a different cadence, or even to a different top water bait to help you get those bites. All right, so when I'm thinking about top water baits, first off, I got to just say number one is going to be something like a hollow body frog, something like this. Here you go. This is a Berkeley Swamp Lord hollow body popping walking frog. That to me is pretty much a standard when you're talking about throwing top water baits for bass. I like it because it can be used in a lot of different scenarios. You can throw it in almost any type of cover. You can skip it under cover. So I think the top water hollow body frog is probably hard to beat when we're talking about the top water bite in my book. One of the things I will mention real quick is that when you're throwing a top water frog, think about the type of rod that you're using. I like to use something that I call my frog rod, and that's specifically with heavy braid. It's a pretty stout rod, and it's got a fast reel ratio. And all those things I think are important to really successfully fish a frog. You're going to be throwing in heavy cover. You're going to get those big bass to bite, and you got to be able to rip them out of there. So make sure you're using the right setup when you're throwing a hollow body frog. With that said, the other baits that I'm going to show you today are going to be used on a different style of rod, but just keep that in mind. That frog is going to need a heavy frog rod. All right, next up on the top water baits, let's go in a little bit different direction. This bait that I'm going to talk about is going to be one that I'm going to use around bedded bass, or bass that are guarding beds. And that's going to be the Berkeley Spin Rocket, something like in a 110. Let's get this focused in for you guys real quick. Something like that. This one's got the two propellers, so it's got one prop on the front, one prop on the back. This is a 110. Comes in different colors and different sizes. This happens to be the MF Shad. I really like the MF Shad color. It also has got some noise to it. But that bait right there, a lot of people call those a spy bait as well, is deadly around boat ramps, docks, laydowns, but specifically when bass are floating around that bedding time. That one's hard to beat. That one's a really good one also to pause on the retrieve and then just twitch it, get it to spray some water, let it pause again, and hold on tight because you're going to get a big bite. Now, one thing to mention about the rest of these baits that I'm going to talk about here in a second is that I like to throw these on a medium rod. What that means is a medium rod with medium action. And the reason why I like to do that is because most of these are going to have treble hooks, and when you pin a fish with treble hooks, you don't want it to come off. So you want to give it that ability to bend that rod, allow that rod to just maintain pressure on that bass, but not rip it out of its mouth. The next top water bait that I'm going to talk about that I like to use, and this one I use more for as a search bait. So that spin rocket, that Berkeley Spin Rocket 110 that I just showed you, this one I'm using more for when I'm targeting bass that are in a specific area. But when I'm not sure exactly where the bass are, or maybe the bass are schooling or chasing bait fish, then I'm going to go to something kind of like this, which is going to be a jaywalker, or what some people call a spook. Now, this is in ghost white. I will mention real quick that I do like lighter colors, translucent, transparent colors when I'm throwing something like this. This also has a rattle. But when I'm throwing something like that, I'm usually throwing it in clearer water. I'm usually throwing it in water that has a little bit better visibility, but I want it to be pretty clear, or as close to a shad color or a baitfish color that I can get. And I do like some of that transparency. I think it really does help. I think it helps those bass to commit on that bite and not really get spooked off by it. So that's a Jaywalker. That one's in the 110. Like I said, it's a pretty neat bait. They did a really good job on this one. The reason why I do like this one so much is because it does have the weight system here in the back, these rattles. But when you cast this thing, you can cast this thing a mile. This thing weighs, it's 2/3 of an ounce, and it's 4 3/4 inch, but you can cast that thing a mile, especially on a medium rod. All right, next up on the Topwater baits is going to be one of my top 5 baits of all time, whether that's fishing below surface, on surface, whatever you're fishing. When you're fishing for bass, for me, this has got to be in my top 5. I've always got one of these things tied on, and that's going to be the Chopo 120. This one is in bone color right here, but this bait absolutely is a big bass getter. I love this bait. Like I said, probably in my top 5. This is in bone color. I like it in black. I like it in that MF shad that Berkley's got going on. This one also, you can hear a little bit of a rattle on it. It's got the, let me mention that real quick because that's important, especially when you're talking about treble hooks and whatnot. But all 3 of these that I just showed you, which are all 3 of these that I just showed you, they happen to all be from Berkley. Now, I'm not sponsored by them. I'm not affiliated by them. They're not paying me to mention anything about these. But one thing that I really do like about the Berkley products is that I think they're really well made. I think they work really well. They work for me. But they all come with those fusion hooks on them. I really do. I'm a big fan of the fusion hooks. I really do like those fusion hooks, and I will replace treble hooks or other hooks on other baits with those fusion hooks. I'm a big fan of them. So anyways, back to that Chopo. I like using that thing kind of as a mixed bait. What I mean by that is I like to use it for searching for bass. So when I'm throwing it across flats or submerged vegetation, it's a great bait for that because you can cast that thing a mile. Again, the 120, this one is coming in on a full ounce. So again, on the right setup, you can throw this thing a mile. You can cast it forever. You'll be able to cover a big, huge flat, a cove, whatever that might be, a shoreline, whatever you're fishing. It's great for throwing on a point. It's great for throwing on a windy point. I really can't say enough good about that Chopo. I absolutely do love it. But I think it's one of those baits that can be used in a lot of different scenarios. But not only as a search bait, but when you do know that bass are maybe orienting to cover specifically, say like big trees or big laydowns, if you can get that next to a big tree or to a big laydown, a lot of times the noise, that presentation, and it almost like a fleeing presentation really gets those bass to just flip the switch and kill it. So again, big fan of the Chopo 120 for topwater baits. All right, next up in the topwater bait, which is a little bit maybe less thought of, or doesn't get as much attention, I think, when most people talk about topwater baits. But for me, it's definitely in my arsenal, which is going to be some kind of a wake bait. Now, this one happens to be a Fish Labs BioShad wake bait. This one is a 4-inch, 3/4 ounce floating wake bait. You can see the aggressive lip right there, almost a 90-degree angle. It's jointed, has 2 sets of treble hooks on it. I love this bait. It does a really good job on several different types of retrieve, whether you want to chop it back to you, whether you want to straight retrieve it, whether you want to fast retrieve it, or whether you want to retrieve it, pause, and retrieve again. It does a great job. It is one of those baits as well that I think does really good in clear water and high visibility. It's got that realistic profile and color. I mean, you can look at that eye, look at that face, those gill plates right there. It is a very well made bait. Again, that's a Fish Labs BioShad weight bait. I really love it. I think the weight bait doesn't really get a lot of attention when people are talking about topwater baits. I think a lot of people go towards, like what I go towards, which is the hollow body frog, a spook, or a jaywalker, or even a chopo. But don't overlook that wake bait, especially when things start to get tough or things start to slow down. A wake bait is almost like fishing a glide bait or a big swim bait. And because it's a floating one, and because it does stick to the surface of the water, you can fish it in really shallow water, and you can pause it as well. So even when that bite seems like it's getting slow or tough, maybe switch over to a wake bait. You'll pick up some of those bites. All right, next up, I'm going to go a little bit outside of the box on this one, but I like throwing this one, especially when I'm around smallmouth bass. It seems to do really well, and that's going to be a good old popper on a fly rod. Now, this is just a styrofoam popper. These also come in wood, whatnot. This is one that I've had for many, many years. It's actually beat up, but this is just a foam popper. They also come in little versions or smaller versions, something like this as well. These little poppers, surprisingly, are absolute bass killers, especially smallmouth bass, and especially during that summertime when they're eating a lot of stuff off of the surface. A lot of bugs and insects are around on the surface. These little presentations, these little snacks, you'd be surprised what bass will come up for these things, and it catches monsters too. Now, I will say that they will catch a lot of fish. So you're going to catch a lot of bait fish, you're going to catch a lot of bluegill, you're going to catch a lot of smaller bass. It just flat out catches fish, but it also is going to give you a chance at those big bass as well. So thinking a little bit outside of the box, I love throwing around a fly. I love that topwater bite. So if you guys haven't caught a bass on a fly rod, I highly recommend that you give it a shot. It's a lot of fun. If you don't have that set up, maybe find someone or go out with a friend who does enjoy fly fishing, and maybe you guys can actually bridge the gap between what most people think fly fishing and bass fishing is. It's a lot of fun, and yeah, it just gives you something different to throw. All right, so that's going to do it for the topwater baits. Hopefully you guys have enjoyed this video as much as I have making it for you. I really do enjoy making these things for you. And if you do appreciate these videos, do me a favor. If you haven't done so already, hit that subscription button. It really does help out. And check out that selecting the right frog video. Should be right at the end of this one. I really do appreciate you guys' time. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again.